So when I was in high school, we were watching a post 9/11 anniversary documentary. And it was very painful to watch because it had painted Muslims and people from Muslim countries in a very negative light. And then for me to sit there for like an hour in class to watch that was very painful. So I was the only Muslim in my class. Even though there were other Muslim students at my high school, I was the only Muslim in class. And I remembered at the end, someone had said something very derogatory about Muslims and said, well, this is why we just bomb their countries. This is why, these guys are just like filth. And I remember at first I started to feel very dizzy because I just had fear. I don't like this fear of anxiety, this fear of danger, because someone was saying something that was very violent towards the communities that I partake in and I am proud of. So I felt a lot of fear of someone essentially saying something very violent and being very comfortable saying something so violent. And I'm looking around and there are other South Asian students and I was like, hey, like what the heck? Why are you saying this isn't right? And I look around to the other South Asian students and not a word from them. They had, when I made eye contact, I remember one girl had looked away. And I remember just sitting there and I was just like, seriously? Like I thought, like, we may not be like besties on the bus ride back home, but I'm kind of expecting a little solidarity here, a little bit of, because if they didn't know you were a Muslim, you'd be subject to the same treatment. And it's not about being Muslim or Muslim, being South Asian, not being South Asian. It's just about protecting each other. And I had expected that. And that was something I'd always wanted when I was younger, when I would see like and feel discrimination from adults or from other kids. I was kind of hoping someone would have my back, and to have that rug pulled under me at such, I wouldn't say a young age, but a pretty formative age, was very jarring.
I'm going to explain it, how it was explained to me. Like, I don't remember it. I learned in college for the first time that there was more than one place being hit. But I want to also talk about my family. My grandfather telling his daughter to stop wearing the hijab was like a eye-opening moment for our family, just because my dad's dad, he's a little bit more on the religious side. So for him to tell his daughter don't wear it anymore because of that fear was so crazy, because when I was growing up, they encouraged me to wear it, and I still wear it to this day. And I think that's something I want to teach my kids of, like, no matter what happens, like, do what you think is right for your identity, and your safety.
So I was 2 years old when 9/11 happened. Yeah, I was two. And I don't remember a time before it, but as I've mentioned throughout, it's been super defining. In one sense, in a very real sense, from my parents' anecdotes, my mother came to the United States just two years before I was born. So she had this experience of living in a pre-9/11 America just for a small amount of time as well. And when she used to introduce herself, we look pretty similar. She was also pretty like ethnically ambiguous. People wouldn't know where she's from. And then she would be like, oh, I'm from Afghanistan. And they'd be like, where is that? And then it would be this like fun little conversation. And then she would say it's a country in Central Asia and so on. It's about the size of Texas, everything. And that starkly changed after 9/11. Obviously, everyone had an opinion on it. And everyone had an opinion on us and was defining us in all these ways.
Like, so one of the teacher's rules was like, oh, you can't eat in class. And then like my friend like pulled like a goldfish out and he was like eating goldfish. And then it was like very typical of that age. It's like, oh, like you see like someone like do something wrong, you want to like rat them out. So like, hey, like look, he's like eating like goldfish in your class. He's like breaking like one of your rules. And then like my friend was like, oh, like you're just gonna rat me out like that? You're just gonna throw me under the bus? And like one of the words of like the teacher that I like still remember, and it's like sometimes like I'll like reflect over them, I was like, wow, that was like such a messed up thing to say to an 11-year-old kid. He like the teacher said to my friend who was breaking his rule of not eating in class, it's better to be thrown under the bus than to be blown up by one. And I was like in the moment I didn't realize, like this is very messed up. You don't say stuff like this to an 11-year-old kid. And it's just like it was the fact that even my teachers were complicit in this. It's the fact that, you know, there was this and I don't remember the name of the movie, but I think back in like 2014 or 2015, there was this like movie of an American soldier who served in Afghanistan or Iraq, or like he had some um some, I think, like mental health issues or PTSD after he came back, and they, I think it was Saving Private, no, I don't remember the name of the movie, but irregardless, like part of the, like, one part of the plot, like apparently there was like this, you know, like South Asian actor who played the role of a young kid, and he was apparently a suicide bomber, and like apparently he blew himself up outside like an American post. And then, like, I've never seen this movie, but I remember for like a straight year I would just be like bombarded with this thing where it's like a conversation would go like, oh Hassan, I saw someone who looks exactly like you in the movies. And I was like, okay, like, and then just that first statement, it's like, it's hopeful. Like, oh, like you saw someone who looks like me on screen. Like, okay, like that's such an unheard of concept. Please tell me more. I'm intrigued. And then like the next thing out of their mouth was like, yeah, he blew himself up. And it was like, wow, like you didn't have a problem saying that to me as an 11-year-old kid. You start a statement off with like, I saw someone who looks exactly like you. And it's like, you know, it's like it's a moment of joy for like an 11-year-old kid who doesn't see himself, you know, reflected in television screens. And then the next thing that comes out of her mouth is like, yeah, he blew himself up. It's like, it's just like, wow, like literally no words whatsoever. And after that, it was just conversations around 9/11, even as I grew up, were just so like difficult, in the sense that I could see the peering eyes of my classmates just like looking into me whenever we were having those discussions. And yeah, it's just like Islamophobia and racism was so normalized in the media that it was even consumed, not even, you know, excluding every other news headline, just even talking about 9/11 documentaries, that normalized it so much, where a generation of kids grew up and are still growing up thinking that it's okay to do this to their Muslim peers, that it's okay to do this to their South Asian peers, to their Pakistani peers. And that those are some of the earliest 9/11 related memories that I have.
I was 4, you know, when all of this 9/11 happened, and when the aftermath happened. And so my whole life has been shaped by this. And going to a school with like kids who like have never even had that, even got a whiff of that. Like, that's not their fault, but I just was like, oh, like, I can't talk about this because it's shameful, but I also can't talk about this because people, like, it's just going to be another way for people to see me as weird, or, you know, whatever. I was already like the brown kid who like wore marudani to school, and kids were like, that smells weird, or like would have like kaduvad or something, like what is that, like that smells gross, like all this stuff. And so, you know, already like all those sort of like brown kid things that you hear about.
First of all, like 9/11 occurred just 2 days before we were all set to visit California to visit my mom's niece. So my dad had spent over like $800 in tickets. And because discrimination became so bad, he was too scared to even ask for a refund at the from the airlines. Um, and so, you know, like on top of that, during his work, he and some of his fellow taxi cab driver friends, they would, you know, pretty much get assaulted by passengers. Like my dad, he was like thrown punches at. My dad's friend, he was also like, you know, beaten up. And like he would be called, like, because he was Pakistani and he had a longer beard, my dad's friend, he like was called Osama bin Laden, stuff like that. So my dad was always in a flight or fight mode. This really affected the household. He was super stressed. He would, you know, like he would not be happy. Like he would just constantly fight with my mom, like, you know, saying like how difficult it is. He's constantly on the verge of getting hurt or killed even. Like he was just very much on fight or flight mode for a while. And because Chicago, you know, is such a big it's such a big city, even though it wasn't New York City, like people were very, very proud of their aggression. Like they would have no shame in discriminating and insulting and, like, you know, sending threats and whatnot. So it did affect my household. My dad was very scared. He was also just very overprotective. So he wouldn't let my mom go out with me either, like to the park or outside. So, you know, that took a huge toll on my mom's mental health of just being like isolated at home. My mom's a hijabi as well. So on top of that, you know, my dad would just not want her to be outside at all. So that was a very, very difficult component in my parents' lives. You know, 9/11 definitely affected my household.
I think part of 9/11, part of Islamophobia, part of xenophobia is how Muslim women are viewed. And I actually also took a gender in the Islamic world class this past year. And so women from the East, you know, are depicted as like oppressed and that we have no rights. But my experience with Islam is that we do have rights and that I am allowed to make choices. My mom taught me that like Islam was one of the first religions to like allow women to own property. And so like in that time, that was so forward. And I think now we still have to prove that. We still have to prove that we are leaders, that we are intelligent, that we are fully capable of doing so many things. So with her nonprofit, I feel like part of it is, you know, getting rid of that narrative that Muslim women are not that smart and are oppressed. And through their mission of leadership development, civic engagement, and philanthropy, it puts women in this light that hasn't been shed before.
Kindergarten was my first experience in American public school. I barely knew English, but I was smart. I was going to figure it out. And so I went like confident. And then I'm being asked stuff like, oh, like, what does your name mean? Like, tell the class. And I'm like, I don't know, like, Navraj, Navi, like, what? But like, they're being like so curious, right? Like, show us that, what's that? Like, just random things. And like, and then there was also one other South Asian girl in the kindergarten class who I was like, we were like attached together because we both were like it was very comfortable, like we could both understand each other. We didn't have to like feel different among other kids. And then come to know next day, like teachers separated us, right? And they like, I'm on one side, she's on the other side, and I'm like, hello. And like I go home and my mom is the one who's telling me, oh, I got a call from your teacher that you won't stop talking to that one girl, so she separated you guys. And I was like, wow. I was like, that was like the one person that I really thought I connected with. And she lived in my neighborhood, so I knew we were of like this like similar class level, so it was very like comfortable too. And I was like, wow, like why do I have to be separated from her? And again, in the moment, I didn't really perceive that it was because we were the two brown kids who like to talk to each other. But the way that my mom explained it was that, oh, it's because you're not learning English. Like when you talk to her, you don't speak English, so you need to separate so you can learn English. And that was the way that it was like taught to me that I was like, okay, fine. But again, like I had to dim down my identity in order to assimilate into American culture, like to learn English at like age 4, right? And so that's probably the first experience that I can remember really where I had to perceive my own identity in conflict with the identities of people around me.
That date or that phrase now, like 20 years after the fact, it just brings up a lot of feelings and a lot of memories. But really just the start of the war on terror, this entire terrorism apparatus discourse that I have grown up in, the complete like weaponization and racialization of, South Asian Muslim communities particularly, but South Asian communities more broadly, especially being Afghan. I guess there's grief in various forms. There's grief for the people that were lost on that day and the family friends that we know and the family friends who, almost went into work that day, and the communities that, are still suffering from, the losses of loved ones. And then there's also grief for, the decades and generations of war that was justified through that one tragic event in different parts of the world. And there's also a lot of grief for, people in Afghanistan and different countries today that are still feeling the consequences of policy decisions, to intervene in certain countries and to just all of that. So there's grief in a lot of different ways, and there's a lot of sadness and tragedy surrounded by that.
Like, I remember I was talking about a certain instance, and one of my friends, like, just at the end of the story, like, the look of her face was just like heartbreaking. I don't think I've ever seen heartbreak like that before. And it was a story about me, and I'm sitting here like laughing it off, and I'm like, at the end of it, I was like laughing super hard. My friend is like, girl, don't laugh. You're a victim. And I'm like, I'm not a victim. I'm a survivor of it, I'm not saying that those experiences were okay, but I've learned how to not internalize that it's not all of who I am. That like the fact that I grew from it is such a celebration itself. But seeing like the look on her face was so jarring to me. I was like, you don't need to, it's okay, like don't cry. Like it's gonna be okay.